Let's see.
Looks like it's live.
We're
Live
live.
from Austin, Texas. This is the Plutopia Happy Hour. And our guests this evening are our friends from EFF Austin. I'm Scoop Sweeney, and over there in South Austin is designated driver John Lebkowski.
The designated deriver.
Derive for yourself.
Yes, exactly. Well, welcome, folks. We have with us right now, and others may show. Oh, wait, there's Kevin. And it is possible others will show up, but David Hensley is here. Raise your hands when I call your name. There's David, Chris Boyd,
Howdy.
Alex Sharistani,
Hey, y'all.
and Kevin Welch.
You.
And I think tonight we ought to talk with Alex first because Alex sent something very interesting today. And it would be probably a good lead into the conversation that we were hoping to have tonight about social media, Section 230, et cetera, et cetera. So, Alex, what did you send us today?
Yeah, so I've been working on something in a personal capacity. It's a legislative agenda item, which typically I've been involved in, and other members of the EFF Austin board and other people in the community have gotten involved in Texas legislature initiatives. And this time I thought I would take a swing at a national initiative. And so I was thinking about the problem and discussing the problem with some of the fellow board members of social media and free speech protections. And, you know, we all understand that private companies have the right to run the business however they like. So kicking anybody off of a platform is fully within their rights and not an inhibition of free speech. Of course, we're talking about Donald Trump being kicked off of Twitter, which is, you know, depending on who you talk to, great news or terrible news. And there's also been this ongoing conversation aside from Donald Trump about breaking up big tech, and particularly the data, the stranglehold on data that larger social media companies have. And so this seemed like a really good opportunity to try and swing for a form of regulation on social media companies that addresses the free speech issue and the competition issue. And so over the past few weeks, I've been drafting some potential legislation language. I've been working on a one-pager, which is what I sent out to everybody today. And as of today, I've started reaching out to various senators and Congress people to see if I can find a sponsor for a bill.
Excellent. Well, so the problem, I guess, that we all have been thinking a lot about is the power of social media, partly because there are really only 2 or 3 platforms that sort of tend to be there. It's not really a monopoly exactly, but it feels a lot like a monopoly. It feels like Facebook is inordinately powerful, and maybe Google, and maybe even Twitter. Um, and if a person is deplatformed, like removed from Facebook, it's much more significant than it might be if there were alternatives to Facebook, if they could vote with their feet and go to a different alternative. And for this reason, there is quite a bit of discussion about whether there should be some kind of regulation to prevent what people are sometimes calling cancellation, deplatforming, all removal of content that people add to the platform, that sort of thing. And there is quite a bit of discussion, particularly about a regulation, or actually a law that's in effect, and it's referred to as Section 230. It was Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act from back in 2006, some of which was gutted, the part that really pertained to decency. Can anybody kind of jump in and explain exactly what it is that Section 230 does and why people are focusing on that as a potential problem?
I suppose I can start that conversation. Sort of wish Ritika was here. I know during law school she focused a lot of her research efforts on this, and she was working with some pretty smart people on her research. So she probably has a lot more to say about it than I would. But Section 230 basically provides a safe harbor for internet providers and various websites on the net. Basically, what it says is just because a website publishes information that is provided by users does not make the provider the speaker of those statements. So if someone goes on Twitter and says, I'm going to blow up the Eiffel Tower and makes a legitimate threat, Twitter is not thereby criminally liable for also having said those words. So as you can imagine with the internet, having that type of immunity is sort of what allows the internet to function. If Twitter did not have the protection of Section 230, they would have to go through every single post, whether that's algorithmically or with human review, and make sure it doesn't violate some law before allowing it to be published on the internet.
Which I guess means that one potential consequence would be that Twitter or Facebook might become more like a traditional publishing company that has to vet everything before it's actually published. Correct?
Right.
Yeah, that's as I understand it. Basically, everything would have to get vetted by a moderator, which on the scale of billions of users, the current everyone can participate in the conversation internet we know and love couldn't really function. I can also throw in a little interesting historical tidbit. You always hear about Section 230 of the CDA, which is the Communications Decency Act, which I believe was passed in 1998. But you may wonder, why don't I ever hear about any of the other parts of the Communications Decency Act? And it's actually very interesting because it used to be a much larger law that was basically implemented at the end of the 90s to deal with the growing problem of illegal content on burgeoning internet forums, namely things like sharing illegal copyrighted movies or music, or more horrible things like child pornography, etc. But it was an attempt to try to rein in the anarchy that was going on. But interestingly enough, the law is actually a weird hodgepodge of two separate approaches to the problem that were kind of rammed together. I recommend anybody check out Oregon Senator Ron Wyden, who's one of the authors of the CDA, for basically the talk about its weird history. But the whole rest of the law was actually found unconstitutional and an infringement on the First Amendment by the Supreme Court back in, I think, 2003. And Section 230 is the only part that was left standing.
Yeah, I want to correct both of us. I think I said it was 2006, but it was 1996.
Oh, thank you for getting the dates right.
Yeah, it was a couple of years earlier. And at the time, EFF Austin was very involved. So most of you were not part of EFF Austin at the time, but we certainly got into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I was invited to be part of a brief that was sent to the Supreme Court. There were a bunch of those, and of course, the Supreme Court did what we all thought was the right thing, was that they came down in favor of freedom of speech.
Yeah, I think I probably was contributing to the reason the law existed at the time. I was probably using Kazaa or LimeWire to share copyrighted content. So I was probably the reason the law was necessary at the time.
I'd have even been Napster.
Now, some people are saying now that they're using the word censorship a lot, that like Facebook or Twitter or some online platform is censoring somebody by either removing something they said, like removing a tweet or whatever. And some of us have said, I particularly have said, well, they are private companies and this is within their right to do so. And I've had some people sort of yanking on my chain about that, saying, oh, well, you're not in favor of free speech then. And I said, well, free speech swings more than one way. And the private company has the freedom to remove content that they feel is problematic, right?
I think we need to dial back the clock a little bit and look at where we came from, because there's this thing called the World Wide Web, and anybody who gets deplatformed by Twitter, Facebook, Yandex, VK in Russia, anybody who gets deplatformed from the World Wide Web can go find web hosting, and they can set up a website. And if their content is compelling enough, their users will follow.
Substack.
Substack. Yeah,
exactly.
You don't even need Substack. WP Engine.
Right.
Or Linode. If you've got the chops, you can run your website on a VM or a bare metal box somewhere.
Yeah, but the argument is what I mentioned before, which is that because Facebook is so prolific and has so many adherents, there's so many people who are actually part of Facebook, that being deplatformed for Facebook is much worse than it would be if you were deplatformed from some small, entity that had very little reach. It's like your voice has been squashed.
I'd say, sorry, you want to go, Alex?
Yeah, just one thing. I want to tie into something John had said earlier. He said not quite monopoly. I would disagree there. I think it is a monopoly. So it's sort of a natural monopoly in the same way a utility is, because there's a very limited resource that these companies are trying to capture, and that's your time, right? Like there is not an unlimited amount of time that people can use to go to every single social media platform they can possibly go to. And so leaving behind a Facebook or a Twitter or any of the other big players doesn't mean that you are like leaving for another option. Really, what is keeping you on the platform is your network, your friends. So that is like one of the big problems that this proposed bill is trying to address, is that it's impossible to actually pick up and leave in any meaningful way, because why would you want to go and see, say you wanted to leave Facebook for say it's Twitter and it's in the new days, right? And you really just love the idea that there's 280 characters max. That's all you get. And like, you just love that functionality, and that's what you want to leave for. Well, the reality is you're not actually just buying into like what functions and features they offer. You're buying into the network that they provide. And so if your network isn't at one of those other competitors, no matter what different type of product they offer, whether it's short videos, long videos, live streams, tweets, whatever, you're just not going to be able to compete. And Parler, I think, is actually an exception to the rule that just happened to luck out because of the political fallout of Donald Trump being kicked off of Twitter. So I think free speech is becoming implicated because there's not real competition, and it's hard to actually establish competition in social media.
Yeah, I would agree with pretty much everything Alex said there. I would make a quick snipe and say, yeah, if only Parler had actually had a competent CTO who had not checked in a breaking hack to their GitHub that let all their users' data get stolen. Yeah, it was literally the CTO. So it would have been better if they'd, one, had a better team. But two, I guess I will say, though, to give a bit of the flip side a little bit, I do agree it's a monopoly. And I also agree that, well, there's 2 points I want to make. One, on the one hand, the people who are claiming that these deplatformings are violating the First Amendment do not know what they are talking about, because First Amendment only has to do with the government, has nothing to do with private companies. That being said, the people who also want to argue that it's not censorship are a little full of shit, because censorship doesn't have to involve the government. It can involve all sorts of things. There's even a thing called self-censorship, where you automatically edit what you would say based on the disapproval from society you think you would get.
But typically the definition of censorship is censorship by a sort of an authority. It might be by the church, or it might be by the government.
An authority of some kind, which could be society.
Facebook,
I actually recommend anybody I recommend anybody do a deep dive into reading some of the Wikipedia pages on censorship and associated sources, because it's actually a much more complex topic than I think we often oversimplify it as. But more than that, I will say that I absolutely agree that you're buying a network when you buy these social media accounts, and that's a lot of what the value is. That being said, a lot of people who are like, like, oh, well, I don't want to leave Facebook and set up my own website or, my own email newsletter. And isn't it funny how so many people crying they've been canceled? I hear about them all the time on their Substack newsletter. Like, I hear from them all the time, but they've been canceled apparently. But the thing is that a lot of these people they're not actually complaining that they've lost an audience. They're complaining that they've lost access to algorithmic amplification of their voice, particularly often paid algorithmic amplification of their voice, where they're mad that they are not getting their content seen by far more people than its organic appeal would result in it being seen by, because they can pay money to show it to more people using a social network's algorithms. That's really what they're angry about and what they think they have some First Amendment right to, which, well, even the most dyed-in-the-wool capitalist, I think, might dispute that's not a fundamental right being seen by everyone.
So Kevin, is what you're saying is they're actually mad that they're not being allowed access to a service as opposed to any kind of like actual speech rights or whatever? Is that more or less what you're?
At least some of it, I certainly think everyone is allowed to speak in our country. Everybody doesn't have a right to be popular or famous with their speech, which is what some of these people seem to be mad about. And not organic, mind you. Like, I guarantee you, people who got really mad about getting deplatformed, like Alex Jones, yes, he has a big fan base. Plenty of them still go to his InfoWars website. But a huge amount of his reach was he was paying vast sums of money from his supplement empire to get his content shown to way more people than were actually interested in it. And he's mad he can't do that anymore.
Well, let me ask a silly question. That's my specialty. Does a site like Amazon.com enjoy any protection under Section 230?
Yeah, think of stuff like reviews on content, right? Like, so people can say anything in those reviews technically. So that would be one of the things. I think what you might be getting at, though, is people reselling copyrighted content. Is that?
Or harmful content.
Yeah. So so that is not something that I've dived into too deeply, but I want to say, like, off the cuff, that I think it's probably protected, because Amazon allows third-party services to provide items for sale, and they don't really have any gatekeeping function. You can report it, you can get it taken down. So I sort of assume that that as long as it's not being shipped from their warehouses, they probably have that protection. I bet it's different if it's in their warehouses.
And they also have the ability to do a little canceling of their own. If they just don't like the way someone's doing business, they can easily kick them out. And I'm sure that's all covered in their terms of service.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. There's a problem with big tech, and it's not really big tech's fault. Like, I think that's part of the conversation that gets overlooked a lot, is like, there can be a problem that isn't somebody's fault. It's just a problem that exists now. And big tech is going to have a responsibility to their shareholders to try and hold as much ground as they possibly can. It's like also not their fault, because it's kind of the legal system we find ourselves in, that they have to maximize their profit and whatnot. So if people are coming in saying like, hey, you have to let go of some of your control, they have a legal obligation to like try and keep it, in broad strokes. And I think that's something that if we brought to the table more often might make for more productive conversations, whichever side you take.
I think that's a fair point, Alex, and I can't believe I'm going to actually moderately defend Mark freaking Zuckerberg here. But while I certainly feel he's done a horrendous job stewarding Facebook, the truth is nobody anticipated a lot of the crazy side effects of his invention. And I think we may all snark at him all we like. I think many of us in charge of Facebook would have made the exact same mistakes, no matter how much with hindsight we like to claim we would have done a better job.
Do you really think he's done a horrendous job, though?
I think you could have done a worse job, but I also think even with the kind leeway I just gave him, I think you could have done a better job too.
Have you all heard that?
What I remember about that is that all the times that I said early in Facebook's history that I don't think Facebook can survive this, when they would screw up, and they would always recover, and they were pretty smart about the way they recovered every time. And I think that was Zuckerberg.
I actually think that was mostly Sheryl Sandberg, but we can agree to disagree.
Have you guys heard that Radiolab episode about Zuckerberg and the Facebook Supreme Court?
Is this about that group of like human rights and free speech advisors he's collected?
Yeah,
that's what he's referring to.
Yeah, so I don't know if you all have listened to Radiolab. They do stuff like More Perfect, which if you're interested in legal issues, More Perfect is an excellent podcast. So I went to law school. I paid a lot of money to like hear about law, and they provide insights that you don't get in law school, right? It's not just about the law. It's like about the facts behind it and the political will and all of this stuff. So it's like fascinating, and they do a really good job of that. But so I trust them as a source. And one of their reporters went and interviewed Zuckerberg about this Supreme Court thing. And, you know, if he's to be believed, which, I mean, I think in most cases, I think everyone sees themselves as the hero of their story. So like, I want to believe that they believe what they're saying, right? Zuckerberg is actually afraid of what happens when he hands over the reins to somebody else in terms of free speech and like access to the internet and that sort of thing. And I think it's probably true. Like, because like, just because he's made mistakes doesn't mean that he wants them to be there. It just means that he's like one person who's doing his best. And I think it's sort of intriguing as a point, because we always think of him as like this big evil guy making money off of us, which is, you know, partially true, but I don't know. I think there's like another side of it that like it could be a lot worse than it actually is.
Well, and I wish some of our friends from Facebook were here, but if you build a platform that serves billions of people all over the world and carries their conversations, I mean, it's absolutely complex, and it's not easy to fix anything there. I would think there's never been anything quite like it, you know, so there's also no precedent. There's no rules really, and they're having to find their way into it. So I'm a little more charitable with Facebook. I kind of understand that they have bigger problems than most people understand. People will log into Facebook and think about what they're seeing and how it relates to them, but they're not really thinking about how the wheels turn that serves them what they're seeing, and the complex algorithms that they have to govern how information is served and that sort of thing. And I think that it's what you would call a wicked problem. I think that they have problems that really don't have great solutions.
I mean, yeah, you know, and particularly I see so often people on both the right and the left complaining that, oh, Facebook is censoring what I'm doing on the platform. And as a programmer, I'm just like, no person censored you. You got wrapped up in some very dumb moderation bot that has no clue what it's doing, but you're convinced you're dangerous and Zuckerberg has a personal vendetta against you. And every time I see it, I'm like, no, that's not how any of this works.
Yeah, that's really it. That's like Game B people getting kicked off of Facebook.
I saw that
because
thread.
They were caught in a
you
purge,
tried to educate them, but they didn't want to hear it.
Again,
well, because they're really important people, and
everyone's the hero.
Yeah,
everyone's like the star of the show for sure.
Well, I think Zuckerberg did a big favor to Bill Gates and took the heat off of him. Remember when he was the Antichrist?
Well, he still is to certain corners of the internet.
It seems like everyone takes a turn at being the Antichrist. I don't know.
Right.
So you guys you've heard of the intellectual dark web, right?
Unfortunately, yes.
I think tonight we can be the founders of the intellectual bright web. Let's light it up.
We can be the white hat. What's the intellectual dark web?
They talk a lot about this kind of stuff, free speech issues and cancel culture. They tend to be on the right, and they tend to be doing a lot of hand wringing about Dr. Seuss, really,
Oh yeah,
among
that
other
one
things.
drives
Yeah.
me nuts. That one drives me nuts.
And just to give a little more information for those who are just hearing the intellectual dark web, it's short for a dumb right-wing internet movement called the Dark Enlightenment, which is basically this group of right-wing thinkers who think the Enlightenment was a mistake and we should go back to medieval cultural values. I'm not making this up.
Right.
Oh, I didn't know that they were that far gone.
Oh yes, that's
Oh,
what
yeah.
they're winking to those in the know with that name.
I've recently decided I have a deep problem with conservatism in general, in that it
Sorry.
as soon as the Industrial Revolution started, the genie was out of the bottle. You can't stop this. You should have, if you are a conservative, you should have squashed this whole iron forging thing, because at that point, as soon as we got iron, we were off.
Production is like outpacing earning power and that
Yeah.
sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's just like you can't stop this innovation. You can stop it in an individual country, and I'm very worried that the conservatives are going to stop innovation in the United States, but they're not going to stop it in China. They're not going to stop it in Africa. I was reading this fascinating thing on Mail List. Yes, an SMTP based mail list that I've subscribed to, where this guy was describing how illiterate cell phone users send each other voice messages over the various platforms, Facebook, Telegram, whatever, because they can't read, but they can figure out the buttons to push on the cell phone to record a message to send to their friend that says, yes, I want to buy your fish, or hey, let's go, the fishing boat is working. Yeah. And it was just like, yeah, this is a great advance for these people to be able to communicate, in near real time, but not have to depend on the flaky cell phone network. It's the data gets through slowly, fast, whatever. And I was just like, that's brilliant. There are upsides to these things, but you're not going to put that genie back in the bottle. You're not going to take us back to medieval times. Nobody's going to want to go there.
It's fun.
You mentioned conservatives, but are they really? I mean, the people who call themselves conservatives now don't seem very conservative to me. They seem to be basically confused about what they really are.
I think that's fair. I think so. I've been like actually wrestling with this question as well. So in my estimation, if you're a conservative, there's a general, like this is an overbroad statement, but there's a general fear of change. And with liberals, there's a general optimism about change. And like that's obviously very broad strokes. Things are nuanced, everything, but it seems to be the trend. I've been wondering if that's a historical fact, right? Like, are conservatives always afraid of change or not? And I'm just sort of curious if this is like, if it is the case, does that imply that it's about, I don't know, like getting older, right? So like I've had this conversation with my wife Maggie a lot, right? Where we sort of assume that we're going to be conservative when we're older, not because we change our opinions, but because society is changing around us. And I'm just, to your point about the confusion, I'm wondering if that's what's happening with conservatives of like, I don't want things to change, I'm afraid of it, but then also like a little regressive, like thinking that like because things changed, I'm in a position I don't like. But it's like sort of a fascinating thing to dive into.
Yeah, but the thing about getting older is that hopefully you get smarter or wiser, and that doesn't seem to be happening with conservatives.
Well, I've been a long time on and off reader of The Economist, which is not really a liberal rag. And I was reading an article that they had about whence conservatism? Because worldwide, there's this conversation going on. And they expressed it as we're in favor of a tap the brakes conservatism. Okay. So let's not go and, build these networks. Let's not go and do all this research. Let's not go and do all this whatever technology without stopping for a moment to think about the implications and then carefully moving forward.
Well,
And
Chris, if that's true, you just called the entire EFF Austin board conservatives, because that's literally kind of what we do with tech evangelism. We're like,
Yeah,
whoa,
I mean,
wait a second.
yeah, and it was very interesting because it's like, yeah, well, I feel that way very much in what I do for a living, which is packet pushing and internetworking stuff. And there is an explosion across the industry right now of automation and shedding staff. And I'm like, wait a minute, we're going to have a big global internet meltdown, and there's not going to be anybody that knows how to fix it working at any of the internet companies, because it's all going to be bots / slightly dumb AIs. And so it's just going to be a mess.
What would you put the timetable for this apocalypse? Oh, sorry, Stu.
Anywhere from tomorrow to 5 years from now.
So you think we'll have a major internet crisis no one knows how to fix within the next 5 years?
Or tomorrow.
Great.
Yeah, I mean, we've had a few incidents since I've been doing the BGP stuff. Where people have triggered bugs and routers and things like that with relatively innocent things, but it required some smart human getting in there and saying, oh, well, here's my problem, and typing commands into consoles on multiple devices around the world to actually fix it. And so I'm very worried that, with the push for driving shareholder value, to quote Neil Stephenson, that a lot of the service providers that underlie the internet, I think that a lot of companies in the near future, possibly not Netflix because of their chaos engineering, will find themselves in a position of, oh, well, wait a minute, all of our customers just evaporated because the literal internet, the network of networks, is not working, and therefore we can't do anything.
Hey, explain chaos engineering. That sounds like very timely.
Okay, so chaos engineering is a concept that was kind of developed at Netflix in their early days, and it's since grown. And basically, the CEO of Netflix, early in their streaming days, would go down to the data center and unplug shit. And if it broke Netflix, then he was pissed off, and he told the engineers, this is what I did. Make sure that if I do this again, it won't break. And so that's kind of the foundational story of chaos engineering.
It sounds awesome.
I'm going to say, as an engineer who doesn't work for him, I hear that and go, that's genius. But I'm thinking, if that was my boss, I'd want to kill him.
Yes.
It would sound like you could have a 5-year-old child go in and do the same thing and have the same impact.
Well, I mean, but think about where Netflix came from. They mailed you a DVD, and so yeah, basically, as far as technology is concerned, he probably was very much equivalent to a 5-year-old child. It's like he goes and he pulls the power cord on this thing, and things break. And so,
well, networking isn't the only business that's killing themselves with that whole approach of downsizing and replacing it with a smart AI, whatever that is.
Right.
Our local Walmart here, where I live, decided they're going to do away with all the checkout stands, and it's going to all be self-check. And they paid a serious price because all of a sudden a bunch of little old ladies who only write checks showed up and or we're looking for blood.
Yeah.
There's always a downside to that decision, and they laid off a bunch of people, and now all the parents in town, my kid got laid off. He doesn't bag groceries. He doesn't check or whatever, and
Right.
that's been common through retail. Look at what happened to Sears Roebuck. They did the similar things of bringing in a few experts and getting rid of the people who actually knew what the hell they were selling.
Right.
Yeah, it's a
Scoop,
problem. Where are you going to get customers if nobody has a job? If nobody's
Scoop,
making
they probably
any
got
money?
laid off because they didn't have a college degree.
Yeah, you
Could
really
be.
need a college degree to bag those groceries too.
It's true.
it's
I
true.
wouldn't want anybody with just a high school diploma bagging my groceries. How could I trust they do it right?
Well, you know, bagging
Exactly.
groceries is an art. It's not just a skill.
Actually, from some YouTube videos I've seen, it is an art and it should be respected.
Yep.
Hey, there's a different thing I wanted to make sure we talked about tonight, and that's cancel culture. Now, we've already kind of
Do
talked
you want to
about
get
it
us
because,
canceled, John? Do you want to get
well,
us
we were
canceled?
talking about people being deplatformed and content being removed and free speech issues and all that. And this is a step forward from that, which is the idea that there's a culture on the left, however you define culture, that is all about removing content or making sure speakers can't speak or making sure people can't post, that sort of thing.
Hasn't the right been doing that for like centuries?
Yeah, that's what I thought too.
Didn't they get all my D&D and heavy metal albums thrown in the dumpster for teaching kids Satanism?
Yeah.
And they're literally all ready to cancel Lil Nas X over Satanism again.
Well, it's okay if the right does it, it's just, morality. But if the left does it, it's cancel culture.
Yeah,
I have some shit to throw at the wall if you guys want to see if it sticks.
Sure.
Okay, so this is what I've been noodling on. I suspect that, we look back at the past 100 years, 200 years, and we're like, oh yeah, Woodrow Wilson. Oh yeah, I don't know, what's his name, Charles Dickens. Like, all these people are epic storytellers. They're figures of history that need to stand tall for all of time because they're heroes, just like the ancient Romans and Greeks. But I sort of wonder, like, if our scope of what history is too narrow. If we think of like 100 years is too long, right? Like, when we look back 1,000 years, 2,000 years to famous authors, famous figures, there's only a handful, and there's been so many people that I'm sure were lost to history. I just wonder if this is just the same thing playing out, right? Like, who knows how many authors since Chaucer were canceled in 1600, 1700, 1800 because people, rethought what it means to be a good member of society. And we've just lost that. And we just assume that Chaucer was like the only great author of his time. I sort of wonder if that's what's happening here. And there's no way to know. And so I kind of just drink my beer and, hope for the best.
Yeah, well, if you dig back, you kind of wonder whether you'll find some diary entry by Galileo where he says, "I'm a victim of cancel culture."
Yeah.
I mean, he was in a sense. And, on the flip side to your point, Alex, how many people were canceled that like 2,000 years later have been sort of rediscovered and people went, maybe they shouldn't have been canceled? Like, I think
like
of
Jesus.
James Joyce, Ulysses was banned. It was a banned book.
Right.
And one of the greatest books ever written. And you couldn't get it in the United States because he had been canceled.
And even to go back to your ancient Greeks Romans thing, there's been a big push in recent years that, to try to broaden the scope of what we know about ancient Greece. I mean, like, there's a lot of scholarship arguing that there's decent evidence that all of Socrates's moral philosophy basically came from the Greek female philosopher Aspasia. But, she was canceled because she was a woman in ancient Greece.
Well,
So I think that like a lot of it kind of ties into what we were discussing earlier about like how conservative thought, if it's always been, is rigid, I guess. And so I pulled up the Wikipedia article, and apparently formal conservatism, however that's pronounced, came about in like 1660. So in truth, it hasn't even really been around that long. But the main tenet of it is that adherence to traditionalism. And I think that we are at a crux in human history in which you can't, traditionalism will literally cause you to fall behind in every sort of way. And I think that conservatives, maybe not consciously, but at least subconsciously know that, because everyone has a phone, everyone uses social media, or they wouldn't be up in arms about the things they're up in arms about. And so I think that like it goes back to that just general confusion. Like they've trapped themselves in a mindset in which they have to concede to something that's outdated, while at the same time using progressive tools to do that. And I think there's like a lot of cognitive dissonance that's causing them to just not make any sense. And I think, Alex, so you said that you and Maggie discussed, you guys would probably be conservative sometime in the future because of just the whole age thing. But I think that like the way that can be nipped in the bud is that if you just don't allow yourself to cling to traditionalism. Like, and so like, I think that's just it. Like, I mean, you could be, you could be like fiscally conservative or financially conservative, whatever. But like, I think culturally speaking, as long as you don't like condemn people and condemn other people's sense of self and sense of humanity, you're not going to fall into that trap.
I've been wondering if I'll be conservative when I get old.
Not John, never.
We'll find out.
He was probably born old.
Well, if I could here for a second.
But yeah, so
the whole cancel thing is a double-edged sword. I've worked with a lot of musicians back in my music business days who prayed when they released a CD, and these are a lot of hard rock, heavy metal guys. They prayed that they got stickered with the inappropriate content sticker, because it was a guaranteed gold record right there. If you got that, I remember praying when one of my CDs came out. It's like, damn, it's acceptable. I'm not going to be wrong. And it's really that way. Saying something's unacceptable is beauty is in the eye of the beholder kind of thing.
So David, to your point, you had mentioned, like just embracing change and like basically not pushing back on anything. And so I have two thoughts there. One is that I could totally see the younger generation being like, no, we need to call what's wrong wrong and what's right right. Like that is not outside the realm of possibility. And then the other thing is that I sort of think that there's probably a value in having both people in the room. So if you have a company, if you're in like a job context or a sports team context or literally any other context from politics, you kind of want the other people in the room with you because you want like a perspective that you don't bring to the table, right? So for me, I'm an ideator, right? Like I don't like critiquing ideas right off the bat. Like it just rubs me the wrong way, but it's a valuable skill that people bring to the table. And so in a business context, in a whatever context, I actually want people critiquing me. And I don't know that it's bad that, where liberals kind of, or at least progressive liberals kind of want to try a bunch of new things, and like conservative people kind of don't want to try anything. I don't think it would be a bad thing to have them come together and decide we're going to try one or two new things at a time, because otherwise you don't know what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong, because it's all kind of chaos.
So that's absolutely true, because one of the most fascinating classes I took in college was on decision support systems, which were a big thing in the late 80s to help executives make the best possible decisions on where to take the company. And a wide variety of opinions stated without absolutism is the best way to get to a a good decision. And the classic cases that they always used in that class were, look at Kennedy's decision for Bay of Pigs, bad. Look at Kennedy's decision for Cuban Missile Crisis, good. You know, it's like, so what was the difference? And the difference was there were a lot of different opinions in the room when they were trying to decide what to do about the Russian missiles going to Cuba. And that led to a decision to take a forceful but relatively non-threatening approach to do a naval blockade and say, look, if you're going to take these in, we're going to sink your ship. And, you know, whereas Bay of Pigs led to, you know, came from a decision of, we're going to go in and overthrow the country. And so it's a fascinating thing. And that's really my biggest concern about our politics right now, is that a lot of the right and some of the left has decided that they are going to divorce themselves from reality. And they do, you know, I think that I have a reality-based approach to my life. And, you know, I consider options. I look at things. I look at what's going on in the world, and I make decisions. So, you know, I disregarded all the 5G space laser COVID vaccine microchip stuff, and I got my COVID-19 vaccine.
You did what?
Oh, Bill Gates has got you now.
I know it. I know it.
I broadly agree with everything there. And, you know, there's a lot I could say with what you've all said. Like, first of all, you know, Alex talked a bit about teams, and a lot of it is that it really just has become this weird team sport of left versus right, to the point where people aren't thinking anymore. I mean, I literally saw, with the current debate around the Georgia law the Republicans passed to limit voting access, that, you know, a bunch of CEOs of major Georgia corporations like Delta or Coca-Cola came out in opposition to the bill and were like threatening to do what they've done in the past, like with the North Carolina anti-LGBTQ bills, of like, maybe take our business elsewhere. And I literally saw conservatives threatening to retaliate by raising Delta's taxes. Like, that, like, it's so teams now. There aren't any actual rules anymore. It's just about winning. And they're literally proposing liberal policy to get back at their enemies. Like, that's how confused it's gotten.
It's like not it's not ideals based.
No.
But we're at war. It's a Cold War, but we're at war.
And, you know, it also, you know, just thinking about having diverse viewpoints in the room, and ideally even sane conservative voices in the room. I mean, I broadly agree, because, you know, it's similar to like when we talk about wanting diverse voices in any room. And that has included, you know, having people from diverse racial and sexual and ethnic backgrounds, because we get better decisions, because, hey, a room full of white dudes might not think about issues that are very relevant to people who are Black or Hispanic or women or gay,
Kevin,
etc.
I just want you to know you don't speak for me.
Oh no, you're canceling me. What am I going to do?
No.
And by the way, half the time I see people being whine about being canceled, it's just somebody disagreed with them and they're butthurt, like, to be frank.
I think that's true.
But even more than that, you know, I really think about, like, you know, I'm going to out a bit of some of my personal interests and inclinations, but I'm sure John will understand. But, you know, as somebody who is a fan of the late philosopher Robert Anton Wilson, and for anybody listening, yes, he could be sexist sometimes. I acknowledge it, but I still think he had a lot of good points. But I love at the end of the chapters in his books, like Quantum Psychology, he would ask you really thought-provoking questions. I remember, like, in one of them, he literally asked you, if you are liberal, actually try to imagine the thought processes of a neo-Nazi. And if you're a conservative, actually try to imagine the thought processes of a communist. And don't just say you're going to and not do it. Actually try to do it. You won't necessarily walk away agreeing with that person, but you might suddenly actually have respect for how they're a human being who somehow could actually think that, as wrong as you think they are.
Or you could lapse into a psychotic episode. That's another possibility.
Well, he also warns against that. He wouldn't be Robert Anton Wilson if he didn't.
One thing that I kind of like, I don't want to say I'm retorting against you guys, but like, I guess I'm adding.
Well, we
I
want
think
diverse
that
viewpoints, so
inherently the left has a lot more of fractured thinking to begin with than the right. So
Yeah.
when it comes to having different opinions in the room, again, Alex, you and I are pretty much on the same page with that. I'm not one to like, just say something is wrong before I know more about it. Like that's just not fair. But like again, we're talking about a thought process that is staunch on traditionalism. And I honestly think, and I can go into more detail about this later, that because of that like staunch adherence to hierarchy and traditionalism, the whole just mess that the Trump administration orchestrated and thrived upon was possible just because, they all had that very like, this is our person mindset and they all stuck to it. But then you look at the left at the same time and you have all these different like categories of thought. You have tankies, you have all these different like schools of philosophy that I'm honestly not even familiar with all of them that couldn't even agree on what the best way to be a leftist was.
I got you.
So I think that when you have, I don't know, I'm not saying that conservative thought doesn't deserve a voice, but what I'm saying is that if your voice is going to concede to a traditionalism and you have multiple voices doing that, you just have multiple mouths saying the same thing, and it's more progressive and more constructive to have more people from a diverse, from several actual perspectives. Because like if you get a bunch of leftists in a room, like there's a very good chance none of them will agree. Like
I understand what you're saying. I think it's probably because it's way easier to say an idea is a bad idea than it is to come up with an idea yourself. And so conservatives, if they're like cautious in their approach on taking new ideas, it's very easy for all of them to come together and just say all new ideas are bad, right? Like I don't think that is how they would characterize themselves, but just for the conversation's purpose, let's just say that. And then for the liberal side of things, everybody's coming up with their own ideas, but nobody really wants to shoot each other down. I think it is. I don't know if this is the point you were getting at, but I sort of think that liberals have an infighting issue, and I don't know if it's like a bigger issue than that. It could be that we need liberals to just realize like, okay, only one or two ideas are going to get through. Let's focus on those together. And that's the better approach. Or if it's better that everybody throws their ideas out there and see which ones sneak their way past the conservatives. Like, I guess it's a question of like, what should it be versus what it is. And I don't know what it should be.
Yeah, I guess I'll just throw a few quick thoughts of nuance into this, which is, on the one hand, I do actually see different strains of conservative thought where like they do disagree with each other on certain things about the best way to do things. They also, though, very broadly seem to be a little better at putting aside those differences and at least uniting tactically compared to the left. I'm not quite sure what drives that, because people on the far left and right both tend to be idealists in that they believe in a world that isn't, that could be. But for whatever reason, left idealism seems a little less willing to compromise in the name of practicality than the right's idealists. I'm not quite sure what drives that, but it does seem to be some maybe fundamental difference between the two sides.
I keep arguing that we should forget all this left and right crap. It's just, we get so hung up with our concepts of how things should be and ideologies and you know, really delusions. I mean, there's a degree of delusion in all of that thinking.
Well, you're
And-
collapsing hundreds of unrelated ideas about how to run a society and saying that they're all on this single line, which is ridiculous. Even the attempts to make it two-dimensional that you see go around the internet are hilarious oversimplifications.
Yeah, I mean, why not just try to be practical? But then you have to define what the society's goals are. And, you know, is the goal of society to make a few people rich and have a lot of people at their service? Or is the goal of society to make it better for everybody and to help everybody rise up and do better, which is, I mean, that's the way the world I was raised in, that was the prevailing thought. And right now, it appears to me that what we're really trying to build is a kind of like feudal society where there's a few rich people and
Dark
everybody else
enlightenment.
is sort of like, yeah.
Yeah, it's odd. It's like in Europe and other countries, they seem to agree on what the basic purpose of government is. And over here, we can't even agree on that, right? Like, so where they're deciding what the best way to accomplish those purposes are, we're deciding what the purpose even should be. And it prevents us from taking steps in any direction.
Yeah, we're failing to decide it, really.
And I just quickly circle back, John, I think you're right about like us almost becoming delusional because we become slaves to these weirded models. Like, you know, when you look on the left of the political spectrum, there's this current dichotomy between more moderate people on the left or liberals and so-called leftists, even though ironically, while on most issues, I guess leftists are more to the left than liberals, when you take an issue like, say, gun control, they're actually more to the right than liberals. So it's just like this bizarre oversimplification, you know?
Yeah.
We have 3 minutes left. Does anybody have something earth-shaking for our last 3 minutes? You don't have to shake the earth.
I would throw out there that I am always earth shaking. But if anyone's interested in getting involved, so right now I'm just reaching out to people. I'm going to share this in the chat for us on the Zoom. This is the one pager that I put together for social media data portability. I would love for people's feedback. I would love for people who are interested to get on board and just call people and see if we can get this thing off the ground.
I will be emailing you, Alex, because this needs to happen. I, as a programmer, am strongly in support. And I guess just also my parting thought will just be, people need to understand curation is not the same as censorship, and people disagreeing with you is not the same as you being canceled. I think if people could just keep these concepts distinct, we could cut through a lot of this nonsense everybody's squawking about right now.
Yep.
I really like this one pager, Alex. I'm
Thank
sharing
you.
it right now so people can see it.
So all I have to say is that I deleted my Facebook account 12 years ago and never looked back.
You were wiser than the rest of us.
Man, I've been looking for you every day on there. What's
You can't seem to escape the conversation, though.
No, I cannot. I cannot.
Well, thanks everybody. This has
Thank you,
been an
Don.
exceptional conversation tonight.
Fun
Thank
as
you,
always.
Scoop.
Have us back anytime you need to fill more content. I know how hard that is.
Well, I don't know. I
Yes,
mean,
Scoop.
we're finding it seems like everywhere we turn, there's people who have really interesting things to say. And that's kind of
Scoop.
what we're about now. We used to say we were about this or that idea, but we're not really about any particular idea or framework. We're really about just giving interesting people a place to talk about what they're interested in.
Scoop,
Cool.
I'm looking forward to our next visit to a hotel to protest Ajit Pai.
Oh, I'm there, Alex. I'm looking
Yeah.
forward to it so hard.
I'm
Most
available.
low-key protest ever. No one even knows we were protesting. It's
And
great.
yeah.
I forgot about that. That was pretty funny. Okay,
Maybe
thanks
next time we
everybody.
can get 5 people.
Yeah.
Good to
Let's
see
see
you.
if
All right,
we can
thank you,
get
guys.
Ajit Pai to show up for our next one of these.
I mean, he's now stepped down. Maybe I can get him to get real. I should email him.
Yeah, you could get him to be on the board of directors.
Yeah.
That's
Oh, boy.
diversity of thought, right?
Oh my
Okay,
God.
off we go. Thanks, everybody.
Adios.
Uh,